brain in a Petri dish being used for organ cloning, playing pong, and eventually becoming an angry overlord are what you can look forward to in this episode of Raptor Nuggets. Do you remember Pinky and the Brain?
I do.
Do you remember what Pinky and the Brain used to say?
What are we going to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night. Try to take over the world. So this is actually quite apt right now because of DishBrain.
Yeah.
Which
pretty
is
much
the most horrible name that you could give to a scientific experiment that could very well be harboring some form of intelligence.
like a lot of intelligence by the looks of things.
Like a lot of the times we've spoken about robot revolutions, at least amongst each other. How, the robots one day are going to look back at how, Boston Dynamics kicked robots to get them to stand up straight and things like that. And today we're now experimenting with biomimetic hardware. Ed, do you know what that is?
Yeah, well, essentially it's a mixture between mechanics and
biomechanical processes.
Yeah.
So essentially what that means is, like, perhaps in the future we're going to have artificial dish brains in robot housings, and then they're going to overthrow us, which is evidently, with their ruler xylitol, the child of
That's
Elon Musk.
exactly it. Yeah.
So before we get too much off topic, essentially what we're going to talk about today is DishBrain. Literally, I know I mentioned the word DishBrain, but what essentially is happening is there's this most incredible in vivo neuron scientific research going on where they've taken human brain cells as well as the brain cells from immunocompromised mice. They've merged them together and they've grown them in a Petri dish, and they've called it DishBrain. But what really makes this startling is they've taught DishBrain how to play Pong.
Yeah, literally using what was it, eight neurons or something.
Yeah, so the gist
and then
of
stimulating it with currents.
Yeah, correct. So the gist of it is that as the Pong ball moves on the screen, the current that is perceived by the dish brain, either the left or the right hemisphere of the Petri dish, the current will become greater the closer the ball is to that hemisphere. And what's actually happened is the brain has learnt to activate in those areas to bounce the ball back.
Yeah.
Look, that's the basic ass version of this very complex study. Obviously we implore you to go and look it up online and actually read about it, because it is incredibly fascinating, but also scary.
I mean, they want to give this thing alcohol next and see how that's going to fare.
That's right. As if DishBrain hasn't been put through enough. I'm so sorry.
Wow.
I'm just like, imagine. So look, it's quite clear, at least to an extent, that this DishBrain, okay, I don't know if we can argue if it has cognizance or not, but the fact that the brain has learned how to do something just from being grown from cells, who's to say it's not alive? Who's to say it doesn't have consciousness?
I mean, the whole argument of consciousness is not so far-fetched for me, but just because something has habitual repetition doesn't mean it's got consciousness, to be fair. Like a machine that's meant to go up and down.
Okay, so you make a point. But how do we know? And
that's the issue.
The reason I mention that is, that I have I believe in faith. I have my own, I'm Christian at heart. And, not to really talk too much about that, but I, believe in an afterlife and, the possibility of there being a soul. But at the same time, I'm very much also a scientist. And, there are a lot of legitimate questions around is there even a soul? Okay, granted, that's, technically heresy, but you got to just think about these things. Is there actually one, or is it possible that all of that is created by the brain? And if we go down the path of it being created by all of the neurons and things we have that are beautiful in our mind, then who's to say that this DishBrain doesn't have some level of consciousness on some part? Sure, they've taught it now how to play Pong, through... And what was interesting about this is they didn't expect this behavior either. If you read the study, they were actually taken aback by the fact that the brain actually learned what to do and how to do it.
Within 5 minutes.
Right? Now that already, if you take the whole soul religious aspect out of it, right? Just think now of the other ethical implications of this. If we don't really know whether or not there's a consciousness involved here, imagine, and the reason why I say that is because one of the most striking things to me was in the study how the scientists described the brain as perceiving its own world. And I was like, nah, bitch, it's the same world that we're in right now. You've just made it. So it's not like...
You just can't see.
Yeah, or feel, or well, we don't know, right? We shouldn't be laughing about this, but
But the same can be asked of like plant matter. Like plants know how to photosynthesize and they know what to do the moment they are born. Okay. So are they intelligent? Do they have consciousness?
You see, but now that's a question of consciousness, because I do believe that on some level there is a global plant consciousness. As hippie as that sounds, I do think that on some level plants communicate with each other. On a means that we haven't really quite grasped yet.
But does that mean like what we would say? Would that cause a moral dilemma?
A plant?
If I start cutting down
evidently
grass.
not, because we keep destroying the Amazon. So you see, the interesting thing about this is that we have to look at it from a very narcissistic human perspective, where everything that we do in the world is judged solely against us. Are they like humans? And, that's not entirely fair. We know through studies in science how monkeys are incredibly intelligent, how dolphins are incredibly intelligent, cats and dogs, cows. And yet we still do things to them that are incredibly undesirable, regardless of science pointing out how they actually have intelligence. They have cognizance. They can understand, they can learn. So this all comes back to DishBrain, who can also learn and understand. And so, and I don't want to get like too much into the, I suppose, the ethical discussion, right, about this. It's more along the, what else can DishBrain do? Imagine now that this becomes a legitimate avenue for biomimetic sciences, where you could, for example, buy a dishwasher with a DishBrain installed, and the DishBrain analyzes, it would be better than a computer. Do you get what I'm saying? It's a literally biomechanical computer instead of just mechanical.
I can't recall the video game now, but I reviewed a video game with exactly this premise.
Of DishBrain?
A little while ago. Well, where like mechanical evolution existed. It wasn't cyberpunk, but it was like a dark and broody.
No, I'm glad you brought up cyberpunk, because think about that for a second, right? The biomimetic, as we've already mentioned, it's a synthetic method of mimicking biomechanical processes. So my understanding as well of why the scientists are doing this is so that they can have means of testing certain drugs and hardware ahead of time on what could potentially influence the human brain without actually impacting a person. You see, that's technically what this is about, okay? But then at the same time, I'm like, but what about the other practical implications? So sure, we've taught this now, DishBrain, to play Pong. And next, as you mentioned, they want to get DishBrain drunk, which is, why scientists, why? But
Base.
but imagine now a scenario where DishBrain evolves to the point where you could potentially offer some of your cells, your brain cells, grow a part of you, and then have another perpetual piece of you live on forever. And
Like in the island.
yes, well, kind of like in the island, except now you're not creating clones to harvest your organs. Although, I mean, let's be real, I totally do that. Anyway, so
Both of us are like villain energy.
look, I'm all down to growing a brainless version of myself, okay, to harvest organs from, okay? Again, this is this whole like philosophical discussion of where is their cognizance, and anyway, I don't want to get too much into that because that's just like a whole massive debate. But the part that I was going on is recently there was talk of AI and deepfakes, and how allegedly Bruce Willis had sold his likeness to a studio to use in perpetuity. Of course, it turned out to be fake news, but imagine that with DishBrain. Imagine Bruce Willis or another popular figure like James Earl Jones with his incredible voice take parts of their brain, grow it in a dish, and then that dish perfectly emulates aspects of who they were or are.
See, but now the mental conundrum is going, and the ethical conundrum.
But of course,
Like,
because does
now
this
you
James
create
Earl
a little-
Jones DishBrain feel? Can it think? Can it understand?
Can it get royalty payments?
I would imagine that the real James Earl Jones and his estate would get payment. And then eventually
And he'd get an allowance.
in 40 years from now, when DishBrains have have rights, then I'm sure they'd get like back pay and stuff. Oh my goodness.
I live in an estate owned by a DishBrain.
I mean, just imagine the potential of the future. I mean, DishBrains could be in everything, but is DishBrain a real person? No, DishBrain can't feel. Don't worry about it. Like
We're using the word DishBrain now, like
it's normal.
It might be an insult in a few years' time.
You're so look. I feel terrible the thing is even called DishBrain, but I suppose what else? Because that's literally what it is. It's a brain in a dish.
2022 was wild, wasn't it?
Look, don't joke. We're like one step away from nuclear annihilation. Okay, if DishBrain is what causes our salvation, who knows, right?
I'm already watching for Two Sons, Yeah.
Well, with this discussion in mind, what do you think? What do you think of DishBrain? Is it something that you're looking forward to? Is it something that we should be more careful of? Is this what could eventually lead to more realistic AI or deepfake or biomimetic technologies a la cyberpunk? Where you have an arm that has a DishBrain in it, which interfaces with your skeletal system and neurons and your brain. I mean, the possibilities are almost endless. And both incredible and frightening.
Scary. Yeah. Super scary.
But yeah, let us know. You can hit us up on our socials. Let us know what you think. There'll also be a poll on Spotify regarding DishBrain. So if that's where you listen, fill it out. But yeah, if you enjoyed this episode of Raptor Nuggets, you know what to do. So until the next one, bye.
Bye.